4 astronauts splashed down in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego, fresh from a 10-day trip around the moon. It was the first time humans had traveled that far from Earth since 1972. Mission accomplished. Everyone celebrated. But there is a part of this story NASA has not really been advertising. Nobody landed, nobody walked on the lunar surface. Artemis II was a loop, not a landing. And 7,000 miles away in Beijing, China, they were not watching the ceremony. They were checking the clock. Their Chang'e 7 lunar lander is scheduled to launch later this year, aimed at the exact same patch of Moon America wants to plant a flag on. Welcome to the second space race. And this time, it is not a sprint. It is a staring contest. Let's rewind to December 1972. A NASA astronaut named Gene Cernan climbed up the ladder of the Apollo 17 lunar module, took one last look at the dusty gray surface, and radioed one of the most famous sentences in space history. As we leave the moon at Taurus Littrow, we leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind. Here is the funny part about that sentence. It took humanity 53 years to come back. And when they finally did, on April 1st, 2026, they did not land. They just drove past. Artemis II lifted off from Kennedy Space Center at 6:35 p.m. Eastern on a Space Launch System rocket, the most powerful rocket NASA has ever flown. The Orion capsule, which the crew nicknamed Integrity, carried Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, mission specialist Christina Koch, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. For 10 days, they did science experiments, manually piloted the spacecraft, and looped around the far side of the moon at a distance of 252,756 miles from home. Then Integrity splashed down in the Pacific on April 10, 2026, and the whole world cheered, as they should have. It was a beautiful, successful, historic mission. But here's the thing, nobody at NASA wanted to say out loud on camera. This mission was supposed to happen years ago. Artemis I would be an uncrewed test flight. Artemis II would be a crewed flyby by around 2022. And Artemis III would land the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024. Simple, clean, announced with fireworks and commemorative coins. And pretty much every single deadline got missed. So what happened? The short answer is, rockets are hard and space is expensive. The long answer is a 5-part delay cascade that started with the rocket itself. The Space Launch System was originally supposed to be flight-ready by the end of 2016 under the congressional mandate that created it. It did not fly its first mission until November 2022. Then came the Orion heat shield problem. After Artemis I returned, engineers found that chunks of the heat shield had eroded in ways they did not expect. NASA spent 2.5 years arguing about whether to fly Artemis II with the same heat shield or to redesign it. They finally decided to fly it, which worked out, but the debate cost time. Then there is the lander situation. The Artemis plan depends on a commercial lunar lander, which is either SpaceX's Starship or Blue Origin's Blue Moon, both of which are still in development. And Starship, famously, has been blowing up on test flights on a fairly regular schedule. The result? Artemis III, the mission that was supposed to be the triumphant return to the lunar surface, got quietly downgraded in February 2026. Instead of landing on the moon, it is now just going to practice docking with a lander in Earth orbit. That is it, a rehearsal. The actual lunar landing got pushed to Artemis IV, now targeting early 2028. And if the last 10 years of Artemis timelines have taught us anything, that date should be written in pencil. Also, in March 2026, NASA halted the entire Lunar Gateway space station, a planned orbital outpost that was supposed to be the backbone of the whole Artemis architecture. The agency said it was being paused in its current form to redirect funding toward a lunar surface base. Whatever you call it, that is a major piece of the plan that no longer exists. Which brings us to the other half of this story. While NASA has been shuffling deck chairs, China has been quietly building a moon empire. Let me back up. Back in 2003, China launched its very first astronaut into space. His name was Yang Liwei, and he orbited the Earth for about 21 hours aboard the Shenzhou 5 capsule. A historic moment for China, sure, but in the grand scheme of global space programs, not exactly headline stealing. Fast forward to 2026, and the scoreboard looks wildly different. China has its own space station called Tiangong, which has been permanently occupied since 2022. They have landed rovers on the moon. They have landed a rover on Mars. They brought back lunar samples twice, including the first samples ever collected from the far side of the moon in June 2024. They have built one of the biggest radio telescopes on Earth. And they did all of this on a budget that is roughly $60 billion smaller than NASA's. Yeah, you read that right. According to space spending estimates from 2024, the United States spent around $79 billion on government space programs. China spent an estimated $19 billion, less than a third of America's budget. And yet China has completed every planned phase of its lunar program. Now, they have not done it without hiccups. Chang'e 1 slipped from April to October 2007. Chang'e 4 was reconfigured from a backup mission and delayed about 3 years. And Chang'e 5, the sample return mission, was grounded for nearly 3 years after a Long March 5 rocket failed during a 2017 test flight. But here is what matters. Every time something went wrong, they fixed it, and they finished the job. Chang'e 1 in 2007, Chang'e 2 in 2010, Chang'e 3 in 2013, Chang'e 4, the first ever far side landing, in 2018, Chang'e 5, the sample return, in 2020, Chang'e 6, the far side sample return, in 2024. 6 missions, 6 successes. A planetary scientist named Norbert Schorghofer said it plainly in a recent interview: the Chinese will be ahead of everyone else by at least 1 year, but probably several years. That is a scientist, not a politician, saying that. And now we're getting to the most important mission on the schedule. Chang'e 7 is currently slated to launch on a Long March 5 rocket from Wenchang Satellite Launch Center in the second half of 2026. Its destination is the illuminated rim of Shackleton Crater, right near the lunar South Pole. Its job is to search for water ice. The lander will carry an orbiter, a rover, and a rocket-powered hopping probe that can literally jump into permanently shadowed craters where no rover could ever drive. Think about that for a second. A little mechanical space frog that hops into a dark crater and checks whether there's ice at the bottom. That's delightful, and also a genuinely clever way to solve a genuinely hard engineering problem. And if you're enjoying this, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. I'm covering the space race as it happens every step of the way, and the next few years are going to be absolute chaos. All right, back to the chaos. Chang'e 7 is part of a rigorously sequenced plan. Chang'e 8 follows around 2028 or 2029, testing whether you can actually use moon dirt to build stuff. It's bringing a 3D printer to see if lunar regolith can be turned into building bricks. Because if you can print your own habitat from local materials, you don't have to launch concrete from Earth, and suddenly a permanent moon base stops being science fiction. And then, before the end of 2030, China plans to put 2 astronauts on the lunar surface in a mission using their new Long March 10 rocket, their Mengzhou crew capsule, and a lander called Lanyue, which literally means embracing the moon. The spacesuits are already designed. They unveiled them in Chongqing in September 2024. A technician climbed stairs in one on stage. Meanwhile, NASA's Artemis III is scheduled for 2027 and no longer involves landing. You see the problem, right? Now let's talk about why any of this matters. It's tempting to look at the moon and think, cool rock, whatever. It's been up there for 4.5 billion years, so what's the rush? The rush is water. The lunar South Pole has deep craters that never see sunlight. Inside those craters, at temperatures close to -400 degrees Fahrenheit, there are deposits of frozen water that have been sitting there undisturbed for potentially billions of years. And water on the moon is worth more than gold on Earth. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen you can breathe. Hydrogen and oxygen together are rocket fuel. Rocket fuel on the moon means you do not have to haul everything up from Earth, and the moon becomes a gas station for the rest of the solar system. Whoever lands first does not just plant a flag. They pick the best real estate. They start building infrastructure. They get the first seat at the table when international bodies start writing the rules for what you can and cannot do with lunar resources. A former NASA Associate Administrator, Mike Gold, put it plainly at a Senate hearing. He said the countries that get there first will write the rules of the road for what we can do on the moon. The United States has a framework called the Artemis Accords, which about 60 countries have signed. China has its own framework called the International Lunar Research Station, signed by Russia, Venezuela, South Africa, and a growing list of others. Neither framework has been tested because nobody is actually there yet. The first country to set up a permanent base writes the first real rulebook. That is not a small thing. So where does the scoreboard actually stand in April 2026? On the American side, Artemis II is a legitimate win. The Orion spacecraft worked. The life support systems worked. The re-entry heat shield held up. The astronauts came home. Every piece of hardware that needed to work worked. That's a foundation you can build on. Artemis III is targeting 2027, Artemis IV is targeting 2028, and NASA says they will do annual landings after that. The new NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman came in this year and said Artemis II was just the opening act. So the official line is confidence. On the Chinese side, Chang'e 7 launches later this year. Chang'e 8 follows in a couple of years. A robotic test flight of the crewed lander is scheduled for 2028 or 2029, and the crewed landing is officially on track for 2030, according to a Chinese space program spokesman as recently as October. If any of those dates slip, they have not said so, and when their program has hit setbacks before, they have recovered and delivered. Put it side by side. The United States has the most powerful rocket ever built, the most experienced astronaut corps on Earth, $60 billion more a year to work with, and a program that keeps descoping itself. China has a smaller budget, a younger program, fewer astronauts, and a track record of finishing what it starts. America has the horsepower. China has the discipline. If this were a race between two cars, NASA would be driving a Ferrari that keeps stopping for unscheduled maintenance, and China would be driving a Toyota Camry that just will not stop running. Which one gets to the South Pole first? Here is the most plausible read. China's robotic Chang'e 7 will almost certainly land near Shackleton late this year or early next. Their crewed landing is aiming for 2030. NASA's crewed landing is now aiming for 2028, but realistically, given the delay pattern of the last decade, probably 2029 or 2030. The two countries may literally arrive in the same window, maybe within months of each other, maybe within weeks. We are not watching one country sprint ahead. We are watching two programs converge on the exact same destination with the exact same target dates. And the real wild card sitting underneath all of this is SpaceX. Artemis III and Artemis IV, and every American lunar landing after them, all depend on Starship, which is still in development. If SpaceX cracks the full-stack reusable orbital rocket problem, NASA leapfrogs everyone. If they do not, and the commercial lander keeps slipping, Artemis IV slips, and the story writes itself. Here is what I keep coming back to. In 1969, the first space race ended with Neil Armstrong stepping off a ladder while 500 million people watched. The second space race is not going to end that way. It will end with two separate landings a few years apart, each claiming a different chunk of the same crater. Then comes the really hard part. Not flags and footprints, but infrastructure, water extraction, base building, and resource rules. The actual grinding, unglamorous work of turning another world into a place humans can live. 53 years after Gene Cernan said we would return to the moon with peace and hope for all mankind, we actually went back. A NASA capsule named Integrity looped around the far side, and 4 humans came home safely. It was a triumph. It was also a reminder. The United States finished the flyby. The landing has not happened yet, and somewhere in Beijing, an engineer is running final checks on a lunar lander that is going to launch in a few months. The second space race is not coming. It is here, and it is closer than anyone wants to admit. If you want to see what I am covering next week, I am breaking down exactly what Chang'e 7 is going to do when it touches down at Shackleton Crater, and why the little hopping robot it is bringing is about to rewrite what we thought we knew about water on the moon. Click the video on screen. I will see you there.